Hello and welcome to Across the Balkans. Great to have you with us on the show. I'm Nafisa Latic. Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik says Republika Srpska has cut off all ties with the UK and US embassies in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He made the announcement after Washington added a leading politician from the entity to its official list of sanctioned individuals. Dodik himself is also under US and UK sanctions for his frequent calls to break away from Bosnia. Now, this latest rift comes after both embassies condemned a controversial property law, which allows Republika Srpska to stake claim to the public institutions it uses. The US says the move undermines the 1995 Dayton Peace Accords, which ended the war in Bosnia. The law was repealed in early March by the Constitutional Court, but Dodik says his entity may break away unless it is reinstated. Let's take a closer look.
Milorad Dodik is widely known as wanting to break his country apart. The Bosnian Serb leader's calls for secession have grown even louder in the wake of Russia's attack on Ukraine. And more so, after Western powers increased their engagement with the Balkans to resolve long-standing issues and ease the region's path into the EU, all with an eye to decrease Russian influence. But Dodik is also known for his close ties with Putin and has refused to join any sanctions against Russia. He has often praised Putin's actions and even awarded the Russian leader the highest Medal of Honor for his patriotic concern and love for the Serb entity. Just recently, he threatened to cut off ties with UK and US diplomats in Bosnia, blaming them for interfering in the country's internal affairs. This time, he is angry because of their condemnation of a controversial property law. At the end of last year, the National Assembly of Republika Srpska adopted a draft of this law. Accordingly, all properties used by the entity's institutions will belong only to the entity. That move was seen as an attempt by Republika Srpska to confiscate Bosnian state property, even though it's unconstitutional. But the High Representative for Bosnia, Christian Schmidt, suspended the law a day before it came to power. This is the body that oversees the implementation of the Dayton Agreement. Dodik doesn't recognize it and refuses to accept its decisions despite the country's constitution. The OHR stressed that state property can be regulated solely by the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the country's constitutional court repealed the law. Then, Dodik threatened to separate Republika Srpska from Bosnia and said they would take it to keep it if necessary. Less than a week later, the US Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announced sanctions against 3 individuals in Bosnia. Among them is Dragan Stankovic from the Republika Srpska's Administration for Geodetic and Property Affairs. His agency was behind the controversial property law. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has described the law as a blatant attempt at usurping Bosnia's command over state property, and says Dodik's move was a direct challenge to Bosnia's constitutional order and ignorance of the Dayton Agreement. The British Embassy has also rejected Dodik's accusations and called it an attempt to divert attention from the real problems. Dodik now also says his entity would adopt a law on foreign agents. This would target NGOs and civil associations if they get more than 20% of their funding from abroad. The law is similar to a piece of Russian legislation which was recently proposed in Georgia and sparked mass protests. Despite the sanctions and condemnations from the EU, UK, and the US, Dodik continues to threaten the constitutional order of Bosnia.
Adnan Cherimagic is in Berlin for us. He is a senior analyst on the Western Balkans, and he'll help me understand what's behind Milorad Dodik's recent moves. Adi, hello there. Now, can Dodik order House of Representatives in Republika Srpska not to talk to American and British officials in Bosnia?
Well, he can order people that are underneath him that respect his authority not to communicate with the representatives of the US and the UK embassy. Whether they will listen to him, of course, depends on their own decisions. But to legally stop relationship between the US and Bosnian and the UK embassy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, some other institutions and some other people would need to be engaged in that decision.
Yes, it's not entirely his decision on the foreign policy of the Republika Srpska. Now, what was the reaction among other officials in Bosnia to this news? As we know, the US and the UK are one of the main allies of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Well, I think part of the reasons why Dodik decided to announce this decision has also to do with those who were not on the list. So in first place, this was his message to the US and the UK embassies in Sarajevo, not to work with the Office of the High Representative on developing a next potential decision by the OHR that's related to, the ownership of the state property in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But the other part of it was the message to those who are not on the list. And that there, I think in particular, the message is for the EU, because with this decision, he's basically saying to the EU, there's still time for you not to be on my list. And if in order for you not to be on my list, I have a list of requests to you. And these list of requests is well known. It's related basically to the funds that the EU has withheld last year as a reaction to an attempt to collapse institutional and constitutional architecture of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And with everything that's happening with the budget of Republika Srpska and with development plans in Republika Srpska, his actual focus or intention is to get the EU to unfreeze the funds for Republika Srpska.
I want to talk about the timing of all of this. Firstly, what's the US what kind of message does the US want to send with sanctioning these people from Bosnian public and political life? And what does that mean for them on the ground in the future?
Well, I think it's a part of the wider U.S. policy of the Biden administration, in which they want to use sanctions not just to hurt individuals who are on the list, but also to send a clear message of the policy of the U.S. That corruption and nepotism and misuse of public offices is linked to democracy, to destabilization of the countries, and is basically not helping U.S. achieve its foreign policy goals. When it comes to individuals that have been sanctioned, not just in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in the wider region, from Bulgaria over to Albania to Bosnia and Herzegovina, one can see a pattern that these people, both in public but also from the institutions, have for years been seen as problematic, as people who have been abusing public offices and other things. So it's a sense of putting a stamp on something that public has been informed or told about for some time.
We can't not to mention Russia's attack on Ukraine and the fact that a lot of things are happening way faster at the moment in the region. Let's focus a little bit on the UK as well, as Republika Srpska entity decided to cut ties with the UK following the announcement to provide announcement from the UK's government to provide weapons with depleted uranium to Ukraine. Is this Dodik's just another show to Russia, how he's against the West, let's say, and he's strongly aligned with Moscow's policies?
Well, it's no secret that the leadership of Republika Srpska has had close relationship with Moscow, and in particular with President Putin, that a lot of what we've seen in Bosnia and Herzegovina in last year when it comes to the threats to collapse institutional and constitutional architecture of a country in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine was most probably or most certainly linked to a wider Russian attempt to destabilize the political and security order in Europe. So in a month where we have, attempts to have a laws on foreign agents in Georgia, and in the same week, announcements from Milorad Dodik and the leadership of Republika Srpska to do the same in Republika Srpska, one cannot but think if that is all linked or in some ways coordinated. However, the real question is for the citizens of Republika Srpska, for public in Republika Srpska, whether they are willing to accept this kind of path of confrontation with the West, of doing small favors or big favors for Russia, with knowing that, Russia at this moment has no concrete support or no concrete help or no concrete umbrella for the citizens of Republika Srpska or anyone in the region of the Western Balkans, but can simply offer, for a couple of key figures in political and economic life, a refuge in Moscow if things get out of hand.
Right. And what happens now? You already mentioned the law on the foreign agents. What about the law on the property? Why is this law so problematic for Bosnia and Herzegovina? Why is it creating so much stir?
I think for Milorad Dodik, the question now is, with his deep connections with Moscow and Russia, the question is to what extent can he keep his party and his coalition partners, under his umbrella, in particular with all the news about new political parties, new movements being established in Republika Srpska and having support not just from outside, but from also individuals inside the country. And I think all of these attempts are closely linked to him trying to keep the grip of the power, but at the same time to open a space for him to negotiate or to talk to both the EU but also to the West on what are the conditions in the future. What is the financial support from the West for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also for Republika Srpska funds, but also how certain international instruments that exist in Bosnia and Herzegovina, such as the Office of the High Representative, will be used to model not just everyday politics of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also Western relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this property law, which should be actually adopted by the state level parliament, and which should regulate who is the owner, who can use, from agricultural lands to rivers and other property, is extremely important, both from the economic but also from the political aspect for Milorad Dodik and for Republika Srpska. And in that sense, he does not want the OHR or the Westerners to regulate this and to put him, so to say, against the wall. And I think part of what he's doing now is a reaction, an attempt to stop that or to prevent that. While at the same time, of course, the Western policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the one of trying to sort some of the things, trying to improve relations between different political actors in the country, and trying to have some sort of a stability while looking at what is happening in Ukraine and with Russia and China in particular.
Right, but it seems like the message from Dodik is that he just simply doesn't care about what the US and the UK and EU have to say about any of these moves that he's doing. Why is there a perception that he's feeling more and more emboldened, especially when we have in mind what the West is dealing with in Ukraine at the moment?
I think at the same time, West is afraid of Milorad Dodik in some way, that he might create a reality on the ground that is different to the reality that we have today. And as long as, he's just threatening, as long as he's not doing concrete steps, the West is kind of not too unhappy with what is happening, not just in Banja Luka, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina in general. But on the other side, the same goes for Milorad Dodik. He is afraid of the West using the Office of the High Representative, using the bond powers to try to change the reality on the ground. It is no secret the OHR and the US Embassy have been working closely with Belgrade and Zagreb on what the Western next steps in Bosnia and Herzegovina might be, And I think part of the reasons why he is afraid is, that not just the OHR and the West, but also the neighboring country might come together and decide something that might change the reality on the ground, contrary to what Dodik himself would want to have.
Adnan Cherimogic, great to have you with us on Across the Balkans. I really appreciate your insights. We'll keep an eye on the reaction following Dodik's moves, especially from the US and the UK in the future as well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Let's look at other stories making headlines in the region this week. One of the world's most wanted fugitives will now be held in Montenegro for a month following his arrest by Interpol in the capital Podgorica. The South Korean national, known as Do Kwon, is accused of wiping about $40 billion from the crypto market following his company's collapse. Seoul authorities have now stepped up efforts to track down other suspected accomplices and are seeking Kwon's extradition. He is also charged with using forged travel documents and breaching South Korea's capital markets law. Kwon has dismissed the charges as being politically motivated. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama says he has encouraged his Kosovar counterpart Albin Kurti to take further steps on normalizing relations with Serbia. The leaders met over the weekend in Tirana after Pristina and Belgrade verbally agreed on the EU proposal, but fell short of inking the deal over a dispute on the creation of the Association of Serb Municipalities. According to the EU proposal, Belgrade should not object to Kosovo's membership in any international organization, and that Pristina should commit to giving more autonomy to Kosovo's Serbs. Following the meeting, Rama said Kurti should either guarantee the self-management of the Serb community or operation of the Serbian Church in Kosovo. And Croatia has lifted its internal border controls at airports for passengers traveling to or from the Schengen zone. The country joined the zone in January this year, but didn't drop air border checks until now in order to align the dates with the summer flight schedules. Planes departing or arriving from the zone will now be treated as domestic flights. The move is expected to spark an increase in tourists to Croatia, which is already famed for its spectacular coasts and historic sites. Staying in Croatia, and the President Zoran Milanovic continues to spark controversy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. After downplaying the Srebrenica genocide and interfering in the country's internal issues, Milanovic is now demanding a change in the election law to allow Croats in Bosnia to elect their own member of the presidency. He has even threatened to veto Sweden and Finland's NATO bids unless the law is amended. Milanovic has maintained close ties with Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik, who is known for his secessionist threats, as we mentioned. The Croatian president is accused of insulting Bosniaks, and according to analysts, he undermines Croatia's relations with its southern neighbor. But it's not just in Bosnia that Milanovic is seen as a polarizing figure. Veljko Skenderija has more from Zagreb.
Croatian President Zoran Milanovic has been a source of constant controversy since the beginning of his mandate. After insulting political and other opponents in Croatia during his first months, he soon turned to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Građanska država je daleki san i to je lijepa stvar, ali prvo sapun, onda par.
But this wasn't all. There was an even bigger outrage in Sarajevo after he downplayed the worst war crime in Europe since World War II, the Srebrenica genocide.
Da, sud je presudio da je to genocid. Da, s time treba biti vrlo delikatan, jer to je samo odluka jednog suda. Ništa više od toga. Dakle, postoje puno veći zločini u povijesti, po trajanju, magnitudi i inzistiranjem na tome da je sve genocid, radimo nepravdu, recimo, holokaustu nad Židovima.
These attitudes coincided with Milanovic's increasingly frequent associations with Milorad Dodik, the Republika Srpska leader who has been outspoken with his intent to break away from Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Nigdje drugdje Milanović nije napravio takvu štetu kao u odnosu na hrvatsku politiku prema Bosni i Hercegovini, zbog toga što je to i jedan od najosjetljivijih političkih segmenata.
Milanovic has also demanded a change in the electoral law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which would enable the Croats, one of the three constituent nations, to independently elect their own member of the presidency. But it's more the way in which he has made those demands.
On to radi na način da vrijeđa Bošnjake i bošnjačku politiku i zapravo on tu je razbio sve moguće mostove koji bi doveli do određenog kompromisa do kojeg se mora stići. U krajnjoj liniji, po mom mišljenju, Bosna i Hercegovina je glavni susjed Hrvatske i odnosi sa njom su nam užasno važni.
Along the way, Milanovic also insulted the High International Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Christian Schmidt, and announced a veto on the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO unless the electoral law is amended. Of course, it was a bluff.
To je jedno slovo na staklatnici. Dakle, u svom slučaju on kvari odnose Hrvatske. U krajnjoj liniji on je izvrijeđao Austriju, on je izvrijeđao Njemačku sada. Znate, dakle, to je jedan čovjek koji stvarno u Hrvatskoj zatvara vrata gdje god dođe. Međutim, u konačnici čak i ne Hrvatskoj, jer danas svi znaju tko je Zoran Milanović, znate, i skoro da se više ne obaziru na njega.
Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković has also tried to influence Bosnia's electoral law. And although Sarajevo accuses Zagreb as constantly trying to meddle in its internal affairs, Bosnian officials now seem more open to improving relations.
Temeljni državni interes Republike Hrvatske je jedinstvena, funkcionalna, samoodrživa Bosna i Hercegovina. I to je ono što bi svaka politika trebala isticati ako je racionalna u prvi plan.
And it seems relations are warming. Two high-ranking Bosnian officials, the chairperson of Bosnian Presidency Veljko Skenderija and the Minister of Foreign Affairs Elmedin Konaković, have held meetings with both Croatian leaders in quick succession. Milanovic has also been noticeably silent about Bosnia for some time now. And while Milanovic's previous voters are wondering where the liberal left politician they voted for has disappeared to, the president now finds his electorate largely shifting right, with some even venturing to the far right. But despite all this, or perhaps because of it, Milanovic's popularity has not declined. In fact, he is still the most popular politician in the country. Berushi is the author of Milanovic's first biography. In it, he writes that he was one of two journalists who helped him win a seat, first as the party leader and then as prime minister in 2011. But he says back then Milanovic was a different man.
I bio je pozitivan, bio je vrlo normalan čovjek u tom smislu. Međutim, ovo danas moram reći da ga je malo prebacilo.
The same goes for Milanovic's views about the West. He has since moved closer to the Kremlin, and he has criticized the sending of Western military aid to Ukraine while sabotaging the training of Ukrainian soldiers in Croatia and declaring that Russia was provoked into starting the conflict. But unlike others, one of his former ministers does not think Milanovic is on Moscow's payroll.
Ja mislim da je on u posljednjih nekoliko godina imao kontakta sa ljudima koji jesu bliski ruskim interesima i da je do promjene njegovog stava došlo zbog okruženja i druženja sa tim ljudima.
His statements have made Milanovic a star in the Russian media, but thanks to his views on almost everything, he also recently made it to the front pages of Serbian newspapers.
Ono je, oteto od Srbije. Kosovo je izuzeto iz Srbije. Jel' tako? Jesmo priznali Kosovo? Jesmo. Jel' stojim iza Kosova? Stojim iza Kosova. Ali kad je to jednom napravljeno bilo, dakle bez volje države kojoj Kosovo pripada, a to je bila Srbija, odnosno Jugoslavija, bilo je samo pitanje kada će Rusi ili netko treći napraviti isto. I sad se to događa.
Zoran Milanovic is a polarizing figure, not just here in Croatia, but also abroad. He is either loved or hated for his controversial views. Those in the middle are a few. The unique phrases he uses during his verbal attacks on opponents have earned their own name, Zoranisms. And as divisive as he may be, both his supporters and detractors agree that Milanovic is almost never boring. Veljko Skenderija, TRT World, Zagreb, Croatia.
That's it for this week. Thanks for watching us. Next week, do stay with us as we plan to cover Montenegro and Bulgaria's elections. See you next time from me and the whole team. Bye-bye for now.